You're fine, thank you. Hi, how we doing? Okay, excellent. So, we've got quite a lot to get through, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what it takes to make a successful business in Aberdeen and why Aberdeen is such a good place to do business. I deal a lot with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial companies all the time, and I see businesses being successful, and I see some of them failing, but there's no difference to that in any other part of the world. Lots of businesses about taking risk, and not all of the risk pays off, so sometimes businesses are not successful, and that's not to be unexpected. But let me set out a few factors, for instance, as to why Aberdeen is a good place to be thinking about building a business. Let me set out a few factors as to why. See, I say that again in the hope that somebody will press a button and then a slide will happen. Look, when you compare Aberdeen to other parts of the UK and other parts of the world, we do have a pretty healthy local economy. We've got very low unemployment. We've got a strong history of entrepreneurship. Here, there is a very international outlook, as evidenced by yourself and others, compared with other parts of the UK, for instance, where perhaps it's more locally focused. Because of the energy industry being here for the last 50 years, it means that people in Aberdeen are quite used to working in parts of South America, Africa, Asia, North America, and beyond. So it does have an international thing. We've got the highest concentration of engineers in the UK per head of population, according to the Royal College of Engineering. And we've got focus on multiple different sectors. So at the moment, there's a strong focus on food, drink, and agriculture, tourism, energy, digital, and life sciences. And above all that, it's actually a great place to live and to work and to play and to bring up families. And it's got reasonable connections to the rest of the world through our airport hubs, etc. And on top of that, there is lots and lots of support available for people who are thinking of starting a business in Aberdeen. So let me share with you some of the support that's available. Some of this you'll know about, some of this you might not know about. So Business Gateway is there for anybody who wants to start a business. They give you advice on the basics. How to register a business, how to open a bank account, how to make sure you pay your tax, and all the other stuff that comes with it. Elevator, I believe you've already had encounters with Elevator, some of you already. There is an accelerator to help you get your business plan in place and think about that very first step in business. Opportunity Northeast, Net Zero Technology Centre, Energy Transition Zone, all support different entrepreneurship schemes, unique to the northeast of Scotland. The Chamber of Commerce does a lot of work in terms of providing training, and there's Aberdeen Business Network and others. If I look more nationally, then Scottish Edge, some of you may or may be aware of, but every 6 months, Scottish Edge gives out about £1 million to new start businesses. And you can apply for it as many times as you like, and it's a competitive process. And if you've got the right pitch, and the right business plan, and the right model, then you can win up to £150,000, and most of it's a grant rather than a loan to help you grow your business. So when I speak to entrepreneurs, I say, well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? There's a chance of £150,000 worth of loan money, and even if you get £10,000, that could be enough for your business to survive for 2 or 3 months. So why wouldn't you do this? On top of that, we've got other programs, EIE, Scottish Enterprise, Enterprise Scotland, Scale Up Scotland, Vistage. For early stage businesses, there are other funding opportunities. There are 19 angel investment syndicates in Scotland operating at the moment. 2 of these operate out of Aberdeen, but all of them are accessible to anybody that's got a business there. And they invest businesses. They invest money into businesses by taking equity and taking risk in a business. But that could be the difference between you being able to start a business and not being able to start a business. There are other areas where you can get cash, for instance, Business Growth Fund, Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Investment Bank, and of course, there are a whole range of venture capitalists and private equity firms that operate in the UK and beyond, all of which, when you get to that stage in your business growth, you can access these things. So there's lots of support available, and it's a good place to do business. So let's talk about some of the essentials of the business. And clearly I can't go through everything here, so I've picked out a few factors that I think are important. Firstly, you need to have a product market fit. There's no point in having waterproof shoes that have got holes in the end of them to let the water drain out. Yeah, you've got to have a product that solves a problem that's worth solving. The next thing we're talking about in terms of essential elements is you need to understand whether there's a market. There's no point in making a product where there's only 3 ever needed in the world. So from a marketing point of view, you can understand your existing customer base. You might have a sales plan, which is fine. But on top of that, you'll be looking at, well, how much of a market can I genuinely service? Beyond that, I may have a market that I can address, which may take longer. And then I've got the total addressable market. Now, these figures are all a bit guesswork and a bit arbitrary, but if you're trying to raise money, an investor wants to know that there's room to grow so that they can actually get enough of their money back by investing in you, in your business. So understanding your market is important. How you differentiate your business. There are three broad ways in which we can differentiate our business. We can do it on service, quality, or product, or price, sorry. And people say, well, I want to do all three. And you can't really do all three. You've got to compromise. If you think of this as a triangle, you can operate at any point in that triangle, but it is a single point. So you will sacrifice price if you increase quality. You'll sacrifice quality if you drop price. And there's a choice to be made there. What makes you different and special compared to the other people that you're competing against? Having a compelling message, and I'll come back to this, but for a compelling message, I want the message to be absolutely compelling. I want it to be memorable, and I want it to be convincing. And if I pull these three things together, the part in which they overlap is the sweet spot. And that overlap is what I'm trying to hit. So if I can do that, I can make a message that's completely unforgettable, utterly irresistible, totally believable, and it's an effective way of presenting your information. Getting your message across is probably more important than having the right product. It is the key challenge, I would say, in business, and we'll come back to that. Having a proper approach to sales and marketing. Random acts of marketing are a waste of money. Paying an agent to simply put out press releases on your part is just a waste of money unless you can actually have a disciplined approach. The disciplined approach for us involves three different things. So if we pull, there has to be a focus and a discipline on how you go about deciding where to allocate your time and your resource and your effort. So you don't chain up customers that let you down or don't award you the contract or the product, and you end up thinking, well, that was a waste of money and I've not got much money left. Data and information are absolutely key in this world. We need to track how any of our efforts are doing, and we can't just rely on gut feel anymore. We've got to be out there looking at how we generate a sales funnel and how we boil it down. And having decent processes and systems are key too. Talk about money. Three essential types of money in the business when we're thinking of starting up here. You need to have a business that's ultimately profitable. There's no point in selling something if it costs you more to produce it than the value you're selling for. I mean, that's pretty simple stuff. But on top of that as well, you need to think you can't grow the business unless you've got working capital and growth capital in your business. You can take time and generate that yourself from your own sales proceeds. But if that's going to take a lot of time, it might be better for you to get capital in from outside, either in the form of debt or equity into your business. We've already talked about the potential sources of equity funding into your business already. And the third one is the most important one, which is cash flow. You can have a profitable business with lots of growth capital and still go out of business. Because on the day you went to pay the wages, there was nothing in the bank. And there was nowhere to go, and you had no choice but to shut the business down. So watching your cash flow day by day by day by day is so important. The good thing is, nowadays, virtually all of the accountancy packages you can get for business will do cash flow projections for you if you put all the information into it. And it's a discipline about making sure that you have enough cash in the business. So I chair a business just now where when we do a cash flow projection a month by month, it looks fine. But when we look at the day by day, there are peaks and troughs that sometimes we think, oh, that's scary. And actually 2 years ago, we decided we needed to inject more capital into the business to give us more of a buffer so that we didn't get to that horrible position where if 2 or 3 things happened slightly out of phase for normal, we could have ended up with no cash and having to shut down a business with 1,200 employees, which would have been crazy for a bit of planning. So cash flow is very important. And if we move on here, having a plan for your business, again, it sounds so simple, but a lot of people have a spreadsheet. And a spreadsheet is just guesses built on other guesses, built on other guesses, which is fine, but you need a plan, and a plan has to be realistic. On top of that, you need to realize that sometimes the plan doesn't go to plan. And you've got to change your plan, and you've got to be flexible too. And that takes us on to a kind of the last area here. For a business to be successful in the long run, we need to think about the culture in the business. And that comes down to the values in the business, how it operates, why it operates, the kind of person it is. And it's really about establishing your integrity, which leads to trust. And without trust, ultimately, your customers won't stand by you, your staff won't stand by you. The team, you need the right team in your business. And you start with a team of 1, and you move to a team of 2. Hey, you've doubled the size of your team. It's fantastic. But when you get to a team of 10, a team of 50 and that, you've got to have the right knowledge, skills, and experience in the team. And all of this needs to be led by somebody. And if that's you, then as a leader, you're the one that's got to have the passion to see this through. You've got to have the commitment to be there when everybody else has gone to bed at night to be there. And you've got to have the vision for people to understand what it is you're trying to achieve. And if you're trying to get money invested in your business, then you also need to be very, very realistic, and you also need to be coachable. Because if you're not coachable, nobody can put money in, invest in you, because they've got no faith that you'll be able to deliver what they need. So that's a quick run through of some of the essential features of business. Any questions at this point before we move on to one of those features that I want to dive deeper into? No worries if there's not. We'll plenty come back for questions at the end. So what I'd like to do now is, I said that one of the key things was how to get your message across. It's one of the key things in business. So I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into that and give you a little technique that you can use to think about how to get your message across more clearly. So rather than just skimming across all of the things in business, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. This is a part I've called What's the Story? And it starts with a story, because it starts with, I was the CEO of Wood Group at the time, and I'm in the office. It was a Monday morning. There was a new start to the business. Her name was Kelly. And Kelly had just joined the communications team. And she came in, and confusingly, her boss was called Kerry. And she said, oh, it was a big open plan area. And she says, oh, there's Bob, and there's some of the others sitting across here. She says, oh, I'd like to meet him someday. And Kerry went, well, let's go across now. She went, I can't speak to the CEO on the first day. I says, yeah, you can. He's a human being. So they came walking across to the desk, and I'm sitting there, and Kerry went, Bob, you got a second? I said, yeah, how can I help you? This is Kelly. She's just joined the business today. I said, oh, hi, Kelly. Welcome aboard. I said, what else do you say? Where did you work previously? And she told me this. And I said, well, yeah, I look forward to seeing you about in the organisation. And she's standing there, and I thought, okay, is she going to move or stay there? And she says, can I ask you a question? I said, yes, by all means, ask me a question. She says, I've seen you doing presentations in the Aberdeen area before, and you tend to use stories when you present more than slides. And she says, well, yeah. I said, yeah, I do that. She says, why do you do that? I says, well, I'm getting old. I struggle to remember things, and I find that stories are easier to remember. And she went, really? Have you got an example? I went, oh, have I got an example? I said, yeah, I do actually. I said, I was walking through Aberdeen International Airport. I'd just got off a plane, and I'm walking back towards baggage reclaim, and I saw this person walking towards me, and I thought, they're going to go left, I'm going to go right. No, I'm going to go right, they're going left. And they came right up into my personal space and said, you're Bob Keiller. I said, yes, how can I help you? He said, I saw you doing a presentation at Offshore Europe a couple of years ago. And I said, right, okay. And he said, and I just wanted to say, I remember that presentation. I went, I think that's a good thing. Thank you. And he said, no, you don't understand. He says, I never remember any presentations, ever. He says, and yet I remember your presentation. It was about your core values, and you had 7 props, and you had a little story for each of them. And I said, yeah. I says, here's an interesting question for you. I says, I remember exactly now. It was a business breakfast that it was at. I said, can I ask you, what do you remember from the other 2 speakers? And he went, oh, was there 2 other speakers? And I went, that's interesting. He claims, and I didn't check, to be fair, I didn't check. He claims that he could remember the content of my presentation, and yet he'd forgotten the other 2 speakers existed. And they did a very normal business presentation using slides and a podium and a speech, etc. And I thought, wow. And then I had to point out to him, I said, it wasn't a couple of years ago, it was 8 years ago. He went, oh, was it? Yeah. So I thought, that's great. I've answered Kelly's question. And she went, can I ask you another couple of questions? I went, yeah, I suppose. And she says, why do you use stories and how do you create them? And I went, oh, why and how? I said, if I'm honest, I can't. Let me think about that. So I called these Kelly's Killer questions. Why do we use stories and how do you create them in a business context? And I thought, I'm not sure I actually really know the answer to that. So I began to dig a little bit deeper. I began to look for sources of information. I began to find different areas. I'm looking at books. I'm looking at various sources. And I'm looking to see what slide's going to come up next so that I can tell you what the source was. Who's old enough to remember when phones looked like this? Yeah, one or two. Life was simpler then. It was simpler in many ways. But I was at a presentation up in Queen's Road at the old Queen's Hotel in Aberdeen. And it was a presentation that was set up by a local, it was Mearns and Gill, local PR advertising company who still trade in Aberdeen today. And one of the speakers at that event was from the telephone company called Orange. And he was talking about, he says, there was a funny thing happened. He says, there was a shop that we've got in Southampton, and an old lady came into the shop on a Saturday morning, and she opened the door, and it went ding, and she walked into the shop, and she went up to her sales assistant and said, excuse me? And he went, yes, can I help you? He says, it's my phone. And it was a phone like this. It says, it's my phone. It's got something on it. And the sales assistant looked at it and said, oh, you've got a text message. And she went, what's a text message? He said, it was when somebody sends you a message and you read it. Now, this was about the year 2000 this happened. So understandable. Maybe nowadays you would expect everybody to know what a text message was, but back then, understandable. So she says, oh, well, I've not got my glasses properly on. Could you read it for me? I said, okay. So he opened the text message and he said, hi, Mum. It's Peter here. Can I visit this weekend? And she went, oh, that'll be my son, Peter. He wants to visit this weekend. He can't come this weekend. I've got a bridge tournament. I said, okay. He says, well, tell him that on the text thing. He says, you want me to write a text message for you? Yeah, tell him that. So wrote the text message. And he says, well, I add love, Mum, at the end of it. She, yes, that's lovely, thank you. Put the phone in her pocket and ding, out she went. 1 week later, ding, in comes the old lady again, goes to the sales assistant and says, excuse me, I've got 2 text messages. And this happened week after week. And eventually the lady understood how to read the text messages. But if you remember back then, the keyboard, you had to press multiple keys to get a single key up. She never quite mastered the art of sending any text messages. And she'd come into the Orange shop every Saturday morning to get her text messages answered. He says, and the funny thing she wasn't even an Orange customer. Now, I remember that story as if it was yesterday. And yet, I don't have shares in Orange or in Ericsson or Nokia or anything like that. So why would I remember a story like that? And it's because of the unexpected ending. It's the twist or the element of surprise or the unexpected. And I thought, there's something in that. There's definitely something in that as to why we remember stories where there's an unexpected ending. So that's one element of storytelling. Let me take you to June 2005. Steve Jobs was preparing for a talk that he called the most important talk in his life. And yet it was a talk to some students who were graduating from Stanford University. The reason he called it the most important talk in his life is because he'd been diagnosed with cancer. He was facing questions about his own future, his own mortality, his legacy, and he knew he would be speaking to thousands of graduating students from this American university, and he wanted to give them a message that was important. And the message was quite simple. It was, don't waste your life doing something that you don't enjoy. Find something that you enjoy doing, that you've got a passion for, and make that your life's work, and that way you'll have a satisfactory life. And given that he was the head of Pixar at the time as well as the head of Apple, he could have got people to do animations and characters and any sorts of thing. However, the tradition for the commencement address was it would be held outside. So screens and things were a bit more difficult to arrange. And he knew he had about 15 minutes to deliver the message. And he struggled. He struggled. He rewrote his script several times. There's an author called Carmine Gallo that wrote a book about Steve Jobs 10 years later, and he interviewed his wife, Lorraine, and said, so what was he like preparing for the speech? He said, oh, he was walking up and down the house, rewriting parts of it and scoring parts out. He just couldn't get it. And if anybody sat down at a table, he would say, right, and he would sit down and go through his talk with you. He said, and it was really quite a painful process. But you'd think somebody with that amount of resource would have been able to come up with something, and he eventually resolved to do it in this way. Let me show you the first minute of his talk.
Thank you. I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories.
And over the next 14 and a half minutes, he tells 3 stories. And the 3 stories all follow exactly the same structure. And that's the structure we're going to share with you today that you can use if you're telling stories in a business context, because it's a structure that works. Now, that's a talk that's been reviewed by various people. It's been covered by the chap Carmine Gallo I talked about there, and it's been watched over 50 million times online. So tonight, when you've got the time, go and watch the rest of his commencement speech, because he just covers 3 very personal stories that carry a whole lot of meaning. So he didn't need any slides. He didn't need any props. He told 3 stories to land his message. Now then, that's fine if you happen to be the head of Apple and you're standing in front of 9,000 graduating students in the Californian sunlight. But most of us, that's not our normal working day, is it? Most of us are probably thinking more mundane. So when it comes to selling things, for instance, how do we get our message across when we're selling something? So let's take an example, for instance. Example being, we're selling an insurance policy, and it's £5 a month, and for £5 a month you get various benefits for your family, and you think, well, the team come together and say, boss, we've got the answer. We just need to put a PowerPoint slide together. And then what we'll do is we'll market that PowerPoint slide on media, social media, print media, television, and we'll get somebody to read it out on radio. And somebody says, well, actually, you know what? The problem I've got with that is today, corporately, we don't use that font. We use this font. So the font changes, and somebody says, well, no, we need the right background colours, and we need the logo on it. And they say, right, so we've now got a PowerPoint slide. And somebody who's been studying media says, well, hang on a minute. If PowerPoint slides worked, how come nobody else uses them in television? So when this happened in 2010, the insurance company Aviva decided not to use a PowerPoint slide to carry this message. This is what they did instead.
Last minute packing, as usual.
Oh, where's my goggles?
Where you left them?
Can't find this, can't find that. Still, couldn't do without a family holiday now and again. All taken care of, though. And Katie will get help with uni.
Cab's here.
And Nick's swimming lessons, sorted. Oh.
Mum, it won't be the same without Dad.
We all miss him, love. Help secure your family's future with life insurance from Aviva.
Yeah. So you think you're watching a family preparing to go on vacation, and you think that's the story, but of course, there are a few clues in there. You might have spotted the clues at the start when they put the passports down. There was only 3 of them, and then when he says to his daughter, "And Katie will get help with her music lessons," she turns round as if she's heard a ghost, and then 25 seconds in, she says, "Mum, it won't be the same without Dad." And then you realise this is a story about a family coming to terms with loss, not anything to do with a vacation. And that's why he was dressed in white. That's why he wasn't helping his wife down the stairs with the case. And that's why he disappeared from the scene after that. The whole thing takes 42 seconds. And just when you're emotionally at your most vulnerable, they rip open your rib cage, reap inside, squeeze your heart with one hand, put the other hand in your pocket and take out £5. But it gets the message across, does it not? It gets the message across. Now, the problem with that in a business context is it's quite elaborate. You need a team of actors, you need a stage, you need a script writer. Then you need to hire all the airtime to get it on television, and it would cost you hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds to do that. And again, that's way beyond most of us. Wouldn't it be great if you had an app where you could take people wherever you wanted them to be? Wouldn't it be great if you could take them to a Caribbean beach, or you could take them to the top of a ski slope or whatever? And the good thing about it is we all come with this app downloaded. It's called our imagination. And this is the beauty of storytelling. So let me ask you a question. From the world of plants and animals, and I'm very specific about this, plants and animals, what is the single biggest specimen? And it's not a rhetorical question. You can say out answers, and it doesn't matter if the answers are wrong. What do you think? The single biggest thing from the world of plants and animals. The elephant is one option. Has anybody got bigger than elephant? A tree? What kind of tree? The baobab tree's big. But the heaviest tree would be the giant redwood, the sequoia, because these grow up to about 100 meters tall. And like most trees, they're made out of wood. So they're big and they're heavy. Often people at that question would say the blue whale, because the blue whale is the biggest animal that has ever lived, but it's not as big and heavy as a tree. So I was back in 2005. I'm trying to raise some money to do a business deal, and the problem I had was the investors, the potential investors. I thought, they don't know me, they don't know the sector, they don't know the company, they'll not understand the business. It's a complicated business with multiple contracts in multiple different countries. Lots of the contracts have got no long-term guaranteed, so you could look at this business as being very risky. So why would they think of investing in this business? And I thought, I know what we'll do. So I went into a room like this full of investors, and I asked them to close their eyes. And for the sake of this demonstration, if I can ask you to just do the same, just close your eyes for a second. And I want you to imagine walking through a forest of giant redwood trees. And the giant redwood trees are towering above you. The sun is shining through the foliage, and it's dappled, and it's dancing in front of you. You're walking through it. You can feel the soft pine below your feet. You can hear the birds and the insects in the distance, and you can smell that fresh pine smell. And you walk behind a particularly large giant redwood tree, and you look down on the forest floor, and you find this, and you can open your eyes now. Now, this may look like a £5 Christmas tree from Amazon. No, 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 no. This is a Scots pine tree. And this Scots pine tree is growing between the boughs of the giant redwood trees. But it's competing for moisture, it's competing for sunlight, it's competing for nutrients. And I want you to imagine that you carefully dig it up with all the roots on it, and you take it a few hundred meters, and you take it to a clearing, you dig a hole, you put it down, you put the soil around about it, and you give it a drink of water, and you stand back. And what happens? It continues to grow, but now it grows less constrained, and it grows more quickly. And that was my business plan, and on the back of that, I raised $305 million. So I knew that stories worked. I knew that they worked. I had the hard evidence, but I still didn't know why they worked necessarily. So I kept researching, I kept looking through academic papers, I kept reading books. I'm trying to think, there must be something to this. And I came across this chap on the screen here, a guy called Keith Kessenbury. Keith Kessenbury and his colleague from Johns Hopkins University in the US, they study narrative transportation, which is storytelling. And they were trying to work out, what is it that makes TV advertising effective? What are the characteristics of effective TV advertising? Now, they were struggling because you can't really compare an international ad for the Coca-Cola Christmas campaign with a local ad for a discount carpet warehouse. Because one's got a massive budget and a different audience, and one's smaller. So they were struggling to get a data set that was coherent enough. And then they had the brainwave. They said, why don't we go for the world's most expensive advertising in television? Does anybody know when that would be? Halftime at the Super Bowl. So halftime at the Super Bowl is millions and millions of dollars for a very small slot. So it's only the biggest companies with the biggest and deepest pockets that would advertise to try and hit an audience of several hundred million people, predominantly in North America, but beyond that as well. So they analysed all the Super Bowl adverts, and they analysed all of the sales figures for the companies to try and work out which ones had been more or less effective over the years. And they realised that things like pricing information was irrelevant. The name of the CEO was irrelevant, and I'm asking you to think about your own presentations in a business context here. Showing an organisation chart in all the places where you operate, not really relevant. And it came down to 4 key factors for them. One of them was humour, one of them was music, one of them was interesting visuals, but the one that stood out above all else was having a story, an engaging story. Then they did something that a lot of academics wouldn't normally do, is they made a prediction. They said, out of this year's television commercials, having viewed them all against these factors, we think that this one will be the most effective. And this is the one they selected. See if you can understand what the product is. That's okay, I've got a drink up there.
Only miss the sun when it starts to snow. Only know you love her when you let her go. Only know you've been high when you're feeling low. Only hate the road when you're missing home. Only know you love her when you let her go.
The lighting's terrible.
And you let her go.
They need to switch the lights off. Aye. Now, my apologies if you didn't see all of that, but the story was quite simple. There was a puppy playing with a horse on a farm, and somebody came and bought the puppy and took the puppy away. And as the puppy was being taken away, the horses reacted and went and saved the puppy and brought it back. And clearly the owners were happy, because at the end you saw the man and the lady looking at the puppy and the horse playing in a field, drinking Budweiser. And you think, okay, interesting. That turned out to be the most successful Super Bowl ad of all time in 2014. Why? It's a silly story about a horse and a puppy. Because we remember it. Because it's got all the elements of a good story. It's got a turning point at the start. It's got struggle in the middle. It's got a resolution. And it's got an element of surprise at the end. When you go, Budweiser? Really? Now, if you were in North America, if you're in the US, for instance, you probably would have recognized that, because the Clydesdale horses in that image are actually ones that Budweiser used several times over several years. So you'd probably pick up the theme if you were there. But even if you didn't, it gets into your memory. And of course, they added in a bit of humour, and they added in some great visuals, and they added in some music. So that music from a group called Passenger was racing up the charts at the time. So every time people heard about it, it reminded them of Budweiser. So they went to buy beer at the local supermarket, and they're thinking, what kind will I buy? I don't know why, but I'm drawn towards buying some Budweiser this week. And the sales went up, and it worked. And it's an interesting concept, isn't it? So the conclusion that the professors from Johns Hopkins University came to was story was the main factor in successful advertising. And it said primarily because it deals with us on two levels, an intellectual level and an emotional level, in a way that data and statistics just can't do. But I knew the why of storytelling, but the how of storytelling was still an interesting one. There were lots and lots of books on how to write a film script, lots and lots of books on how to write a novel or a screenplay, but a film script can run to 120 pages, a book can run to 400 pages. If I'm telling a story in a business presentation like this, and I'm speaking at roughly 170 words a minute, then I want something that I can write in a page and a half, or maybe even 1 page. So I was looking for something that would give me a structure that we could work on that was 1 page, until I came across this book, the same chap that I mentioned earlier on, Carmine Gallo, The Storyteller's Secret. By the time I got to page 323 in this book, and I'd look at it, because most of it was saying, stories are a great way to communicate. I'm saying, yep, I understand that. Yeah, they're really effective at getting your message across. I'm saying, yeah, I get this. And then they said, you might want to use Pixar's approach. They have a 7-stage approach. I went, oh, that's interesting. So this is Pixar's approach. They lay out every scene to follow these things. And I'm thinking, well, that's great, but if I try and use it in a business context, people are thinking I'm trying to make up fairy tales. So let's translate that into business language. So I talk about the setting, the turning point, struggle, most struggle, resolution, and implication. I tried it a few times, and it was still too complicated. Still too many steps. So I simplified it by combining the first 2 steps together and only having 1 level of struggle, which meant I had 5 steps. And the 5 steps, if you read the headings for them, are S-T-O-R-I, story. So this is the structure for a business story. These are the ingredients. These are the ingredients for croissants. And if I asked you to make croissants, there's probably 1 or 2 really talented cooks in the audience who could say, yeah, no problem. But most of us, if we're being honest, would probably need something else, a recipe. You need some instructions. And the reason I chose croissants is to make them properly and to get that really flaky, buttery pastry, you need to chill the dough twice. And I know this because my father-in-law is a baker, and he said, yeah, croissants are not easy. They're not easy to do well. So use that as your example. So we need a recipe, and the recipe really, let me ask you a couple of questions here. Let me go back. Do you know who these people are? You might not be able to see them properly, but this is a chap called Professor Green from the world of rap music. I don't think he's a real professor. I think it's his stage name. I might be wrong. Another one is Mel C, who was from a famous group in the 90s called the Spice Girls that you may or may not have heard of. But it's not Professor Green or Mel C I want to talk about. It's this person in the middle, who's Professor Melanie C. Green. See what we've done there? And she works in Buffalo University, upstate New York, and she covers, she works on narrative transportation theory as well, and she studies stories, why they work, why they don't work, what makes them effective. And she talks about emotional connection. She says, and one of the key things to make stories connect emotionally is we need to believe them to be true. And for stories to be true, we need to have enough detail, just enough detail that we know they're true. So when I told you about the old lady going into the shop in Southampton, why did I say Southampton? Because it makes it sound true. If I just said it was an old lady in a shop somewhere, you're thinking, I'm not sure about that. I told you it was the Queen's Hotel in Aberdeen. I told you about the company that run the event, so that it all sounds true because I've given you enough detail. And then we talk about description. I need to describe enough so that you can picture what I'm talking about. The good thing about telephone shops is I don't need to tell you much because most of you will be familiar with a telephone shop. So I used 1 word to describe the telephone shop. Ding, as the door opened. The rest of it, you can add your own imagery to that. You've already got the film production company in your head that can add all the information to do that. So I've got enough description, and dialogue's the third thing. If there are people in your stories, then tell me what they say rather than report secondhand what they've said, because that way they come to life. So when I told you about the old lady going up to the sales assistant, I didn't say she asked for help. I said, excuse me, can you help me? I used the actual words, which helps to make the story sound true. And the problem when you're selling things is the buyer will assume that what you're saying might not be true. So to make your stories truer, you can use these 3 methods, and we call that make your stories 3D. The next thing we need to think about is having an emotional connection with somebody in a story. What's the source of empathy? Why would we care about the story? And we can jump onto this and really talk about 4 potential sources of empathy. And if we move on to the kind of picture sides here. Not in this one. Okay. Sources of empathy. We need to care about person in the story. So we need to understand why we would care about somebody in the story. Is it because they've got weaknesses or flaws or vulnerabilities? Because all of us have got those. Is it because they're facing really tough challenges? Because we tend to favour the underdog? Or is it because they're the kind of person that we would want to be ourselves? Somebody who's kind, somebody who's selfless, somebody who does it for the right reasons. So we need to have a source of empathy in the story. And finally, for a story to be memorable, the start needs to be interesting and sticky. It needs to get us hooked. The middle of the story, we want drama and conflict. So if you're trying to sell to a customer in a business context, if you tell them that you're great at everything and everything's easy, there's no drama, there's no conflict. If you tell them how tough it was and how hard you've been working to make this work and how many prototypes you've done and how tough it's been and some mistakes you've made with clients, etc., they're going to empathize with you because you're flawed and vulnerable and real, the same as they are. And for a story to be memorable, something that you weren't expecting towards the end can really help. So when I told you the story about the Scots pine tree, I didn't mention up front, this is a story of how I raised $305 million, because that would have given away the punchline. By keeping it to the end, you go, what? How much? Now, you can look it up online. It's an absolutely true story. And it led to the creation of a company called PSN, which later got sold into a company called Wood Group, which became Wood Group PSN, and that's how I became the CEO of Wood Group. So that's part of that story there. But it all started back talking about a pine tree in an office and digging up a Scots pine. So these are the kind of essential key elements to a story. STORI is a structure you can use. And then you need to think about making it 3D and having the wow factor by getting these essential emotional elements at the end. And that, for me, is the kind of key to storytelling. Now, if any of you would like a copy of the template that we've got, that we give to people to help that, you can contact us by email, and we will send you a copy of a template that you can use when it comes to your storytelling. Now, when we train people in this, we often ask them to do a story in 1 minute. Not because 1 minute's got anything special about it, it's just it forces you to be disciplined. And sometimes we tell the story in 1 minute. We have, for instance, this chap here, Steve. Steve was talking at the TEDx conference in Glasgow in 2016, and he came to me and said, Bob, I'm struggling with this, with my TEDx talk. And he was struggling because he was trying to talk about too much information in too short a space. And I said, Steve, let's concentrate on making sure you've got the audience's attention at the start. And he says, well, what can I do? I said, well, you tell me, what could you do? He says, well, I could show them a picture. I said, yeah. He said, I could ask them a question. I said, yeah, that would be good, Steve, that would be good. He said, I could tell them a story. I said, that would be a great way to start. I didn't really intend for him to try and use all 3, but this is what he did. This was the first minute of his story.
If you know how to ride a bike, please raise your hands. Take yourself back for a moment to when you learned. Where were you and who were you with? Who helped you learn and how did you learn? This is Hamish, my son. He's probably about 5 in this photograph, and we were on a family holiday where he was determined to learn to ride his new bike. And his prize was that if he managed to ride to the end of the road unaided, then we'd go into the wee sweet shop and get some sweets and he'd ride back. So every day for about 10 minutes we went out and we practiced. I got a sore back holding him up, I ran behind him, I pulled him out the bramble bushes several times, and I cheered when he succeeded. And this is Hamish today. And it just goes to show that once we learn a skill, we can achieve remarkable things with it.
It's good, isn't it? I'm going to show you one final example. This is a young lady called Darcy Anderson, works for a company called Megger down in Dover. And we were working with her during lockdown. And again, we gave her a challenge. We said, for the next session, we want you to do a 1 minute story and think about how you're going to make it different. Think about following the structure, but what are you going to do different? Add in a a sound effect or a picture or something. You decide. And this was her 1-minute story.
Raise your hand if you've ever had technical difficulties in a meeting. I know I certainly have. Around about 6 months ago, I was pitching a campaign idea to the sales team. We had created some great assets, including a fantastic mood film. We were doing the presentation, about to show the film, and then nothing. We pressed play multiple times and nothing happened. We froze and thought, oh my God, how are we going to get this idea across? The videographer then decided to press play on an audio track that we had used in the film, and I started to describe what would be going on in the film if you could see it. After I'd finished describing, I paused and thought, they're never going to understand this idea. And actually, the sales team were really receptive and said, wow, they could see our idea in their head, and they signed the concert off there and then. It made me realise that we shouldn't have an over-reliance on technology to get our ideas across. And if we can't explain our ideas verbally, then they're not clear enough.
It's good, isn't it? And that was over 2 years ago, and we're still in contact with Darcy today because she's a great example. But if I go back to where this started, Kelly came in with her killer questions. So I was eventually able to go back to Kelly and tell her the answer to the questions. So I told you Kelly's story. Then I told you the story about Aberdeen International Airport. Then I told you the story about the mobile phone, Steve Jobs, and the Viva advert. I told you the story about the Scots Pine. Then I told you the story about Keith Kessenbury and the halftime at the Super Bowl. Showed you the halftime Super Bowl ad, which follows the same story structure. Talked about Steve's struggle with his TEDx talk, and then showed you how he actually incorporated a story involving struggle into the TEDx talk itself. So overall, we've got 5 ingredients, a 5-step recipe, and I give you 10 stories that each and every one of them uses exactly those ingredients and exactly that recipe so that you can see how they work. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.